Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, November 3rd, 2024, and thank you for joining me as I talk to myself into this microphone about number 4 Ohio State's massive 20-13 win over number 3 Penn State in Happy Valley yesterday. It was the program's first road win over an AP Top 5 opponent since the Buckeyes beat number 2 Texas in Austin in 2006, and it was Ryan Day's first win over a Top 5 opponent since Ohio State's 2022 season-opening win over number 5 Notre Dame. I was actually at that game. And with yesterday's win, Day snaps a personal 4-game losing streak against Top 5 opponents that dates back to the 2022 home loss to Michigan. Now, the critics are going to point out it was only James Franklin and Penn State, right? Ohio State has won 16 of the last 20 against Penn State. James Franklin is 1-10 against Ohio State. He's now 0-6 against Ryan Day. And Franklin's record against Top 5 opponents is dismal. He's 1-13 against the Top 5. So the critics will tell you, therefore, that this win, because it's only Penn State, doesn't really prove anything when it comes to winning matchup games. But look, if as a fan you want to live in that world where, you know, wins over the likes of Penn State and Notre Dame should be taken for granted, and you're just going to sit there for the next 2 months with your arms folded until Ryan Day beats Georgia in the national championship game before you crack a smile, okay, that's your prerogative. But personally, I don't think that's any way to enjoy a season. Now, did Ryan Day answer every single question about his ability to lead this program to a championship with this win yesterday? No, I don't think we can say that either, but this was a much-needed step in the right direction. Day and the program desperately needed this win after the Oregon loss and what was an indefensible performance last Saturday against Nebraska, which, by the way, looks even worse today with Nebraska losing at home to a dreadful UCLA team. I think the coaching staff and the players deserved every bit of the criticism they got for the way they looked against Nebraska. And it wasn't just schlubs like me who were very concerned about where the program seemed to be heading after that game. Former players like Zach Boren and others, and seasoned reporters like Jeremy Birmingham and Doug Maurice were sounding the alarms all week leading up to this big matchup with Penn State. Now, in the postgame yesterday, Day said, quote, "We were at a crossroads. This was a big game for us. We didn't want to publicly say that. We said that behind closed doors. This was a big game for us," end quote. Now, I think that's a very illuminating quote because to me it confirms that what happened against Nebraska was more than just, looking ahead to Penn State or a letdown game or not managing another off week as well as they could have, whatever cliche you want to use. To me, it seemed there was more going on behind the scenes that Ohio State had to address. Now, give the coaches and players a ton of credit for responding to all the criticism and redirecting the course of the 2024 season. But look, we are having a very different conversation if the Buckeyes don't win this game. But they did, and I think the way they won it should be celebrated and should have fans very excited about what comes next. More on that in a minute. Now, as usual, I'm going to assume you watched this game and know what happened. I'm going to tick down a short list of observations as I normally do, and then I'll let you get back to your Sunday. I want to start with the end and take you to the fourth quarter. It was after a 39-yard field goal by Jaden Fielding that just barely snuck inside the left upright to extend the Ohio State lead to 20-13. Penn State gets the ball at their own 25-yard line with 10 minutes and 13 seconds to play. Now, Penn State star tight end Tyler Warren, who the Buckeyes held in check most of the afternoon, made 2 huge plays on that drive, a 31-yard reception and a 33-yard run to set Penn State up first and goal at the Ohio State 3-yard line with 7 minutes and 31 seconds to play. Without star defensive tackle Tyleik Williams, who had to leave the game with an ankle injury. Now, Ryan Day said, by the way, in the postgame that Williams is going to be fine. The Buckeye defense stuffed Katron Allen on 3 consecutive run plays, putting Penn State into a 4th and goal from the Ohio State 1-yard line. On the next play, Drew Aller attempted to find Warren in the left corner of the end zone, but he was completely blanketed by Lathan Ransom. Aller instead threw to his other tight end, Khalil Dinkins, who was completely smothered by Caleb Downs, who was in his jersey. The pass fell incomplete, and the Buckeyes made another huge 4th and goal stop for the 3rd game in a row. Because remember, the Silver Bullets turned in 4th and goal stops both against Oregon and Nebraska as well. And with that stop yesterday, Ohio State is now 3rd nationally in opponent red zone touchdown percentage. Opponents are only scoring touchdowns on 35% of their red zone trips against the Ohio State defense. The Buckeyes have allowed only 6 red zone touchdowns this season. That leads the country. I mean, that is competitive excellence at its finest by the Silver Bullets. Now, I thought reserve defensive tackle Caden McDonald was a beast on that goal line stand by the Buckeyes. He stepped up huge in Tyleik Williams' absence and absolutely manhandled the interior of the Penn State offensive line on those 4 plays. So huge credit to Caden McDonald, and he continues to push for more playing time. I believe he only played 10 snaps in this game, but every single one of those was hugely meaningful. I'd like to see him get more snaps actually moving forward. Now, after that big stop, the Buckeyes would take over at the Penn State 1-yard line with 5 minutes and 13 seconds to play. And at that point, I mean, I was thinking, with a makeshift offensive line, with 2 guys on the left side playing out of position, just try to get a little breathing room, right? Take care of the ball, don't turn it over, and let's just hope Joe McGuire doesn't have to punt the ball from the back of his own end zone. I mean, I was certain the Penn State offense was going to get another possession. And probably with plenty of time, they still had all 3 of their timeouts left, plus a 2-minute timeout at that stage. And I thought they were going to they figured to get really good field position as well, because Ohio State is not, had been world beaters punting the football this season. I certainly did not have the Buckeye offense going 58 yards on 11 straight rushes to run out the clock on Penn State on my bingo card. But look, that's exactly what the Ohio State offense did. And the offensive line in particular, manhandling the Penn State defensive front to open up holes for Quinshon Judkins and Trey Henderson on that drive. Judkins had 4 carries for 32 yards on the drive. Trey Henderson added 3 carries for 13 yards. And Will Howard called his own number 3 times on the drive, which included 4 yards on a tush push on the first play. Man, Ohio State is really good on that tush push. It seems like they get 4 or 5 yards every single time. Howard also converted 2 third downs on the drive, including a nifty 3-yard run around end on 3rd and 2. Quinshon Judkins absolutely demolished a Penn State safety on that play to help Howard get to the sticks. And Howard also had a 3rd and 3 conversion with just over a minute to play, and Penn State out of timeouts. On the play, Howard pulled the ball on the zone read and went 7 yards to get that critical first down, and that basically ended the game. When it really mattered, Ohio State won both lines of scrimmage in this game, and they did it with Donovan Jackson playing left tackle and Carson Hinsman making his first start of the season at left guard. They made a goal line stand without their best interior defensive lineman, Tyleik Williams. It was glorious. Absolutely glorious to see Ohio State winning the line of scrimmage in a game of this magnitude. Now, I could not have been more wrong about the keys to victory for the Ohio State offense in this game. I was convinced the outcome would be decided by the passing game. And I said in our preview pod, I wanted to see a minimum of 25 targets for Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka in this game. In the end, only 10 combined targets for the best receiver duo in America. Smith finished with 4 catches on 7 targets for 55 yards. He was held without a touchdown catch for the first time this season. Only 3 catches on 3 targets for 31 yards for Emeka Egbuka, but that did include a huge 25-yard touchdown catch to cut the Penn State lead to 10-7 at the end of the first quarter. Sophomore receiver Brandon Inniss was an unlikely contributor in this game with 2 catches for 33 yards, which included a 21-yard catch and run for a touchdown to give the Buckeyes a second quarter lead they would not relinquish. But look, on the whole, the Ohio State passing game was not a huge factor in this game as I thought it would be, as I thought it needed to be. Now, it was a mixed bag for Will Howard yesterday. He finished the day 16-24 for 182 yards passing, which was a season low. He had 2 touchdown passes and a pick. He was also sacked 3 times. That was a season high for Howard. But according to PFF, Penn State only pressured him 8 times. I was surprised when I looked at those numbers today that he was only pressured 8 times. And, Howard wasn't facing the same level of pressure from the Penn State defensive front that many of us were expecting. Howard said in the postgame he thought he played his worst game of the season. Now, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I agree it was far from his best game. Howard threw a pick six to Zion Tracy on Ohio State's first possession of the game to stake Penn State to an early 10-0 lead. And with the Buckeyes leading 14-10 in the second quarter, Howard was stripped on his way to the Penn State end zone at the goal line. The ball bounced off his thigh, went over the pylon, and through the end zone for a touchback. And Ohio State had a chance at that point to take a 2-score lead and really seize control of the game. They had scored 2 touchdowns on their previous 2 possessions. They had the Penn State defense completely on their heels and were about to score again. I think a touchdown in that situation, Ohio State probably wins this game in a blowout. But instead, it's a touchback. Penn State would get the ball at the 20-yard line, and they would also gain quite a lot of momentum back at that stage. So, 2 really, really critical mistakes by Will Howard. I also thought several of his throws sailed on him. Actually, many of his throws sailed on him most of the afternoon. I mean, he missed Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith on deep throws that would have been easy touchdowns. He also overthrew a wide-open Quinshon Judkins that would have gone for a big gainer. Now, Howard did make enough plays to overcome those mistakes, but, he had a couple of critical mistakes against Oregon. As we remember, he dropped a snap on a critical third down, and of course, the game-ending play where he slid with not enough time to set up the go-ahead field goal attempt. And we remember he threw a really bad interception last Saturday against Nebraska. He also made several bad reads in the zone read and in RPOs in that game. Maybe as a Pennsylvania kid who felt spurned by Penn State when they didn't offer him a scholarship, he was a little too amped up yesterday for this game, but whatever the case, Howard has got to clean up the mistakes. That's my one criticism of an otherwise really good season that he's putting together for the Buckeyes right now. Just too many mistakes. The Buckeyes are 7-1. They're still very much in control of their playoff destiny. Still, very much have a Big Ten championship in their sights. But there are more big games coming here in the very near future, and Howard has got to clean up these mistakes. Now, I think the game ball on offense goes to the Ohio State offensive line. With Donovan Jackson playing left tackle and Carson Hinsman starting at left guard for the first time in their college careers, the Ohio State rushing attack finishes with 176 yards against a top 10 rush defense. Quinshon Judkins and Trey Henderson combined for 150 yards of that total on 24 carries. Judkins averaged 6.8 yards per attempt. Henderson averaged 5.4 yards per attempt. And while Will Howard was sacked 3 times, as I mentioned, he was only pressured 8 times by the Penn State defensive front. When we thought, there was a chance the Penn State defensive front was going to live in the Ohio State backfield, I don't think we can say it was a perfect outing from the offensive line. And if you look at the PFF grades, they've been unkind to the Ohio State offensive line. You wouldn't know how well they played based on the grades. But look, with 2 guys playing out of position on the left side, it was plenty good enough against a very good Penn State defensive front with a lot of NFL players in a must-win game for this program. So game ball to the offensive line for their performance yesterday. Now, if we look at the performance of the Ohio State defense, the Penn State offense came into this game 13th nationally in total offense and 7th nationally in yards per play. They were hugely improved as an offense, from last year. Drew Aller came into this game completing 71% of his passes at 10 yards per attempt. But yesterday, the Silver Bullets held Penn State to a season-low 270 yards of total offense and no offensive touchdowns. Aller was held to his lowest completion percentage of the season of 60% and only 7.1 yards per attempt. That was 3 yards below his season average. Star tight end Tyler Warren finished with 7 touches for 94 total yards, but most of that yardage came on 2 plays on Penn State's final possession of the game. I thought the Buckeyes did a really good job holding Warren in check for most of the afternoon. The Buckeyes also held Penn State running backs Katron Allen and Nick Singleton to a combined 42 yards rushing on 18 carries. And I thought the Ohio State secondary was excellent in this game. Only 2 Penn State receivers had receptions yesterday. Trey Wallace had 2 catches for 45 yards, and Julian Fleming had 1 catch for 4 yards. The Penn State receivers just could not get open against the Ohio State corners. Now, after committing 3 pass interference penalties against Nebraska last Saturday, Davison Igbinosun had probably his best game as a Buckeye, finishing as Ohio State's highest graded defender according to PFF with an overall grade of 90.7. Igbinosun also finished with the defense's highest grade for coverage of 90.5. And he turned in what was probably the best individual play of the game at the end of the second quarter, stripping the ball away from Trey Wallace in the end zone for an interception to preserve the lead for the Buckeyes going into the half. That was an absolutely huge play. I'm not sure the Buckeyes win this game if Igbinosun doesn't make that play. And look, I was at my wit's end with Igbinosun after his 3 pass interference penalties last week against Nebraska. But today, I owe him an apology. He was great against Penn State. And like I say, the Buckeyes might not have won this game without that great individual effort from Igbinosun to strip that ball away for the interception in the end zone. I thought Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom were fantastic yesterday. Downs finished with the defense's highest grade for tackling with a grade of 83.9. And as I mentioned, Ransom was all over Tyler Warren on that critical 4th and goal play at the end of the game. Warren was Drew Alder's primary target on that play, and Ransom just completely shut that down. I also love what I saw from defensive tackle Ty Hamilton. He was excellent yesterday. He finished with a sack, and he was great defending the run. His 78.2 PFF grade for rush defense led the team. Linebacker Cody Simon, also fantastic yesterday. He led the team in tackles with 10 and in pressures with 4. He also had a sack. Finally, I thought JT Tuimoloau was impactful yesterday. He finished the day with 1.5 tackles for loss. He teamed up with Kenyatta Jackson on a sack of Drew Aller. And as always, Tuimoloau was really, really good against the run. His 76.6 PFF grade for run defense was second only to Ty Hamilton in this game. I know a lot of fans have been disappointed with Tuimoloau not turning out to be the second coming of Chase Young, but he's putting together a pretty good statistical season right now. He's the team leader both in tackles for loss with 8.5 and in sacks with 4.5. And as I said, you can always count on Tuimoloau to be good against the run, and he's been that all season long. So what does this win mean for the Buckeyes and their standing in the very first college football playoff rankings, which come out on Tuesday? I expect the Buckeyes to land no lower than number 3 in those rankings, behind number 1 Oregon and more than likely number 2 Georgia. But I would not be surprised if the Buckeyes end up at number 2, because Georgia did not look great yesterday against unranked Florida. That game was tied at 20 midway through the fourth quarter. I watched much of that game. And look, Georgia caught a huge break when Florida's starting quarterback DJ Lagway went down with an injury just before halftime. And this was the second time this season Georgia struggled against an overmatched opponent. I mean, we remember they eked out an ugly 13-12 win over Kentucky back in September. I mean, it doesn't matter all that much in the grand scheme, but it'll be interesting to see how the committee treats Ohio State relative to Georgia in Tuesday's rankings. I think it's also going to be interesting to see how they treat Penn State. I mean, I think Penn State has a strong case to land in the top 5, maybe right at number 5, ahead of Texas, Tennessee, and Notre Dame. Okay, that's going to do it for today. The Buckeyes return to the Horseshoe this coming Saturday for a date with the dreadful Purdue Boilermakers, the worst team in the Big Ten. Check your feeds for a preview of that game from Paige, Chad, and me on Thursday evening. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.